Jeff, what a great late summer night for strolling here in downtown Willimantic, Connecticut.
Yeah, it is, Ray. And let's head over to the South Street Bridge. It spans the Willimantic River. I want to check something out.
All right. Well, I see the bridge. It looks pretty normal.
Right, but that's why I brought this flashlight. Check out these pillars here at the end of the bridge.
Oh, wow. That's pretty weird.
Yeah.
There's a giant stone frog sitting on top of a pillar.
There's 4 of them, actually, one on each corner,
Oh, yeah.
plus more empty pillars down the sides of the bridge. Those frogs are here to commemorate a mighty battle during the French and Indian War. We're here to find the site of the Battle of the Frogs. Hi, I'm Jeff Belanger.
And I'm Ray Auger. Welcome to episode 106 of the New England Legends podcast. If you give us about 10 minutes, we'll give you something strange to talk about today. Thanks for joining us on our mission to chronicle every legend in New England, 1 week and 1 story at a time.
And a big thank you to our Patreon patrons who are sponsoring this week's episode.
Indeed.
If you go to patreon.com/New England Legends, for as little as $3 per month, you'll get early access to new episodes, plus bonus episodes that nobody else gets to hear. And we couldn't do this without you guys. If you're not already a patron and you'd like to make a bigger commitment to the cause, we could do even more to bring you new stories each week.
And if you don't already subscribe to our show, do it.
Yes, do it.
Because you know why? It's free.
It is free.
Right? Why wouldn't you? You can find us on Apple Podcasts, Stitcher, Spotify, Google Play, iHeartRadio, anywhere you get your podcasts.
Right. And consider joining our super secret Facebook group, too, because there's hundreds of other legend seekers in there sharing stories all the time.
All right. So, Jeff, we're looking for the site of the Battle of the Frogs during the French and Indian War.
That's right.
Now, my family is French-Canadian.
Right.
And I know yours is, too.
True.
Is someone making fun of some French battle side here or what?
Right, okay, so frog being the derogatory word for a Frenchman.
Right.
I get it. Well, I can tell you the French are involved, so let's head back to the summer of 1758. We'll travel about 4 miles east of here to the village of Old Windham and set this up.
It's July of 1758. The weather has been hot and dry for weeks. We've been in a drought.
And it's also a period of a bloody war. The French and Indian War began 4 years ago in 1754. What's happening is England is trying to expand its presence and influence here in the colonies, and France is trying to do the same thing just up north in a place they call New France. The border between British colonies and French colonies is not really well defined, and it's always moving, so that leads to tension.
Tension that comes to a head when the French construct a series of forts in the upper Ohio River Valley. So British forces, led by Lieutenant Colonel George Washington, were tasked with kicking out the French. Washington and his troops were outnumbered and defeated. It was there in the Ohio River Valley that tension turned to a skirmish, and a skirmish turned into a war.
In 1755, Connecticut authorities mobilized their militia because this war doesn't look like it's going to have a quick conclusion. Now, the French have formed alliances with native people from the north, like the Willimantic Confederacy, plus the Ojibwa, the Shawnee, the Algonquin, and Ottawa peoples, just to name a few. Now, the British, they've joined forces with the Iroquois Confederacy and the Cherokee. This war is about borders and resources, and considering the King Philip's War that took place almost a century ago, native people understand that if they don't pick the winning side, their days on their homeland are numbered.
So by July of 1758, this war has been raging on for 4 years. Connecticut troops are active in battles in nearby New York State, and they're busy watching their own borders because the French have made some bloody incursions into the state's northern section. Plus, the price tag for this whole war effort is becoming a huge burden on England. And now we add in another big problem. We've been in a drought here in the region of Old Windham. Crops and farms are struggling, food is needed for the war effort, and people are scared.
But then, something happens late one July afternoon. The storm begins in the distance, and then some much-needed rain soaks the town. By evening, the rain lets up and tapers off. It's one of those storms where you can walk outside after and smell the sense of summer again. You can feel how the world around you has had a nice cool down. But that's when a strange sound pierces the otherwise calm evening. Over at Parson White's house, his servant is in his quarters outside when his eyes pop open to this awful sound. He hears women and children shrieking as if they're being tortured.
Soon, others in town also hear the massacre. but they can also hear French soldiers screaming out specific men in Old Windham. The names White, Elderkin, Dyer, and Tet can be heard above the din. The sounds fill the region. Parson White believes this could be Judgment Day itself. He wastes no time in sounding the alarm. It's obvious the French and the Indian allies are on a murderous rampage in Old Windham.
By dawn, every man in town who owns a gun or even a pitchfork has assembled to march on the bloody scene and fight back against the invaders. Now, though the sounds and screams have grown a lot more faint by sunrise, the mob can still follow the sound toward Mullen Hill in the east part of town. Just as the men from town crest Mullen Hill, they look below them and see an awful sight. It's brutal. Thousands lay dead all around them. No one has ever seen anything like this before. The carnage, it's almost too gruesome to talk about.
But it's our duty to report what we see, Jeff.
You're right, Ray. I know, but I can't bring myself to describe what we're looking at. You're going to have to do it.
Okay. In front of us, there's a pond. Or rather, was a pond. It's mostly dried up because of the drought. But yesterday's rainstorm has formed a puddle in the middle. Just enough water to get your feet wet, really. But that puddle is enough to fight and die for. Last night, thousands of frogs descended on what's left of the pond trying to get to the water. There just wasn't enough water for all the frogs. And soon, a fight between two frogs turned into a fight between hundreds of them. And by morning, thousands of frogs now lay dead. Only a few survivors remain near the puddle in the middle.
The men from town are standing here scratching their heads as they stare at all the dead frogs. Frogs that were just desperate for water. They now understand the sounds they heard last night were the angry croaks of thousands of amphibians. And from this day forward, the pond has been called Frog Pond.
Locals write down the story in their journals and diaries. Newspapers around the state report the event as a great big joke.
Right.
And in 1891, a local newspaper man named N.W. Levitt writes some words, and his son Burton Levitt composes music for a comic opera titled The Frogs of Windham. The legend continues to grow over time. It's one of those incidents a town, doesn't forget.
Now, from here, we're going to leap ahead.
I see what you did there.
I'm sorry, I couldn't resist. Okay, we jump ahead to the fall of 1924. The story hasn't gone away in Windham, and now the Ann Wood Elderkin chapter of the Daughters of the American Revolution see fit to place a plaque at Frog Pond to commemorate this grand event.
Now, once a story makes it to a plaque, there's something official about the whole thing.
Right.
Something solid. It's tough to argue with a plaque.
It is tough to argue with a plaque. And so between the opera, the newspaper articles, and now the plaque, this is an event that no one will let the town forget. Now, from here, we're going to leap ahead. I know. All right, we're going to leapfrog ahead to 1991 to Willimantic, the next town just west of Windham. The Willimantic has approved funding for a new bridge that'll connect Route 32 across train tracks across the Willimantic River to Route 66 along South Street. The Department of Transportation engineers proposed a design, but folks in town, they're not impressed. They want some style, something interesting. So the state caves in and hires an actual architect, and that's something typically not done for a bridge like this.
Willimantic used to be home to several cotton mills along the river that produced a lot of high-quality thread.
Okay.
The town was known as the thread capital of New England. So these pedestals we see along each side of the bridge are actually supposed to represent spools of thread.
Oh, that makes sense. They do look like that.
Right.
So then you combine another local legend. They added 11-foot frogs on top of the spools at the very end.
Yes. The entire bridge costs $13 million and opens in September of 2000. And that brings us back to today. All right, we need to point out that in our research, we found a journal entry of a local man named Mr. Follett, who operates a mill using Frog Pond's runoff. He claims the pond wasn't dried up at all that night.
Okay.
He recalls the water being no lower than normal and that no one knew what killed the frogs.
But everyone does agree that the noise caused quite a stir in town, and that in their panic, locals even heard specific names within that cacophony of sounds. And they also agree that in the morning, thousands of frogs were dead.
I mean, it almost sounds biblical, doesn't it?
Yeah.
Like one of the great plagues. The end of the world?
And now we're here at the end of South Street Bridge looking at 11-foot frogs sitting on a spool of thread.
Those frogs?
Yeah.
They cost $50,000 each.
200 grand in frogs?
Exactly.
Oh, you know what? Totally worth it to create a bridge that gets us talking about centuries of history and legend. And considering both of our family heritage, Ray, this bridge makes me glad that sometimes a frog is just a frog. I feel like right here would have been awesome to cue the beginning of the song Rainbow Connection, sung by Kermit the Frog.
Yeah, and speaking of music, we found all the sheet music to the Frogs of Windham comic opera on the Library of Congress website. Maybe if this episode catches on, we'll have to gather some musicians for a command performance.
You know what? I'd pay to see that. I mean, I wouldn't pay much, but, something.
All right, if you want to listen to all of our past episodes, watch video clips from the New England Legends television series on Amazon Prime, get dates for Jeff's ongoing story tour, and find links to our super secret Facebook group, leap over to
yeah, there it is.
our newenglandlegends.com.
Another frog reference. Love it.
Yes, and of course, our theme music is by John Judd.
Until next time, remember, the bizarre is closer than you think.